world is becoming more unglued by the day. Local consequences are now showing up. We are seeing sky-high gas prices, higher food prices, shortages, and more. How should you respond? Go to redpills.tv/patriot. That's redpills.tv/patriot. And secure your long-term emergency food storage from My Patriot Supply. My Patriot Supply is by far the largest preparedness company in America. They're in stock and shipping quickly in unmarked boxes to your door. Their emergency food supplies last up to 25 years in storage. When you need it, it'll be there. Lunches, dinners, drinks, and snacks totaling over 2,000 calories a day. Get free shipping on any order over $99. Again, go to redpills.tv/patriot.
Spaceship in the sky to the simulation in the mind. Let's all embark on another journey of Conversations on the Fringe.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Josh, and welcome to Conversations on the Fringe. This is what we do every Friday night, where we bring you that weird, the wacky, the unusual, those things that are usually on the outskirt fringe of conversation. We talk about the things that need to be talked about, but aren't usually discussed. And we do this because, you know what? We need to expand that mind just a little bit more every day, because that's where real growth and true evolution actually happens. I have a fantastic guest tonight. Marvin Herndon, Dr. J. Marvin Herndon, is dubbed the Washington Post as the Maverick geophysicist. His scientific life is characterized by discovering and correcting mistakes made by government-funded scientists. We know all about that. Leading to a new understanding of the Earth's origins, internal composition, evidence of nuclear fission reactions as the source of the geomagnetic field, and a new understanding of the Earth's surface geology and dynamics. For the past 5 to 6 years, he's disclosed the composition of consequences of chemtrails, and consequently has had his reputation impunged, public health articles unwarrantedly retracted, and his Wikipedia page minimized and corrupted by professional disinformation agents. As well as he just released a brand new book today, Chemtrails Are Not Contrails, The Face of Evil, co-authored by Dr. Mark Whiteside. We're going to bring in Marv in just 1 minute after a quick message from our sponsor. Guys, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. I'm telling you, you're not going to want to miss this one. The global financial system is on the verge of collapse. Here in the United States of America, we have rising inflation, rising cost of goods and services from gas to food. We have supply chain disruptions, and we have the incompetent presidency of the United States of America running the U.S. dollar into the ground by debasing it, by radicalized spending and printing. There is only one thing in this world right now that is a worthy investment that has been the hedge for inflation year after year. Guys, that's gold and silver. Look, I invest in gold and silver, and there's no reason why you should not either. My buddy Dr. Kirk Elliott is an economist and financial advisor, and he is amazing at what he does by helping you get your 401ks, your IRAs, or just helping you purchase gold and silver bullion. You can give him a call at 720-605-3900 or go to getgoldtoday.com and let him know that Josh from the Red Pill Project sent you. All right, and we are back with J. Marvin Herndon. Doctor, how are you doing today?
Oh, great. And I'm really glad to be here talking to your audience.
I'm, obviously we had this discussion beforehand. I'm fascinated with everything that you've been doing, your kind of life's work. Can you kind of give me an overview, kind of how you got into all of this? Because you started as just a traditional geophysicist, correct?
Well, I got my bachelor's degree in physics from the University of California, San Diego. Then I got my PhD in nuclear chemistry from Texas A&M. Then I was invited for a very special apprenticeship, if you would call it, a postdoctoral apprenticeship with two very senior, quite aged scientists, Nobel laureate Harold C. Urey and Professor Dr. Hans E. Suess. And they had been present when I gave a lecture and saw something in it and decided that this would be an opportunity for me to learn from them. Now, at the time, I didn't need the money because I had other postdoctoral support. But when I was offered this, how could I go wrong? And I did. These were masters. I mean, Harold Urey was, a colleague of Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. And, these are the giants. And so I learned what science ought to be. And I learned how to make discoveries. And so it was a great opportunity. And then in 1979, I was studying a kind of a rare type of meteorite called an instatite chondrite. And I realized that this thing had silicon in the metal and it had a compound of nickel and silicon in it. And I realized that if the Earth's core originally had silicon in it, it would take the nickel out, drop it out, precipitate it, and make a mass exactly identical to the inner core. Now, think about this. If you were to be able to go to the center of the Earth, halfway down, you'd get to a fluid iron alloy core. And then at the center of that, there's a solid object slightly smaller than the moon and about 3 times as massive. That's the inner core. And it was discovered by a lady seismologist named Inga Lehman in 1936. She reasoned its existence because when earthquake waves go from one material into another at an angle, they're bent. And on the opposite side of the Earth from where an earthquake occurs, there should be a shadow zone where the earthquake waves were diverted so they wouldn't appear there. But they did. They found them in the shadow zone. This was a big mystery. And Inga Lehman solved the mystery. She reasoned that if there was a solid object of this size, the earthquake waves would be reflected from that into the shadow zone. Now, it wasn't until the 1960s that this was actually proven, but it was so convincing that nobody had any doubt before that. I mean, this was the fact. Of course, the real problem then was, what was the inner core made of? Well, Harvard physicist Francis Birch, 1940, reasoned that it was iron that was crystallizing from the melt, rather like an ice cube in a glass of ice water. And at the time, he didn't have any data to suggest otherwise. But in the 1960s, data became available, especially about these rare instatite chondrite meteorites. And so in the 1970s, when I was studying them, I realized that the inner core might not be at all what they had thought for 40 years. The first thing I did was I derived this logically, and I took the paper up to Harold Urey. And I watched his face as he read it. And he smiled, yes, yes. Then he offered to communicate it to the Proceedings of the Royal Society of London, very prestigious journal.
Yes, it is.
Well, while I was waiting for it to be published, I thought that perhaps the people, there'd be debate and discussion, as there should be, and people with the well-funded labs would take the idea and run with it, leave me in the dust. It didn't happen. It was as if the paper were never published. There was silence, except I got a highly complimentary letter from Inga Lehman the lady who had discovered the inner core. And she said something like, I admire the precision of your reasoning based upon available data, and I commend you on the important result you have obtained. This was the lady who reasoned the inner core. So I was surprised. I didn't know what to make of the silence. Then my NASA grant that supported that came up for renewal.
Oh, no.
And it was not renewed for no good reason. And since my employment at the University of California at San Diego was dependent upon that, I was on the street. So at this point, I realized I probably, if I had capitulated and promised never to challenge anything, I probably could have managed to get some kind of funding and maybe been like one of these other people that are still functioning.
Right.
But I knew I was on to something important. So I decided I would just do it on my own nickel. And that's what I've done for almost 45 years.
Wow.
And so here's the thing. When you're really making discoveries like the inner core, the center of the earth, not being what people thought, well, that means that the rest of the interior of the earth isn't what people thought, which means it got that way from a different reason that people thought. And you build one step at a time. It's like progressing through the wilderness. You make one little discovery and it leads to another discovery. Sometimes the path isn't clear. The discoveries haven't been made. But that's been my life's history. And in 1992, I published a paper in the Naturwissenschaften because since the late 1960s, astronomers had noticed that Jupiter, also Saturn and Neptune, radiates about twice as much energy as it receives from the sun. Mm-hmm. Well, I was always brought up to know that, planets only receive energy and then re-radiate it. And that this was a lot more than that. Now, the geoscience community, the planetary scientists, the astronomers, they were all making up excuses that, the planet is still collapsing after 4.5 billion years. But I realized, in fact, this was curious. I was walking through the grocery store one day, and all of a sudden it hit me like a lightning bolt that Jupiter has all the ingredients necessary for a planetary nuclear reactor. Huh. So I came home and I worked out the physics, used Fermi's nuclear reactor theory, and I published that in Naturwissenschaften. And then I got to thinking, I was thinking about the hydrogen being used to slow neutrons. And then I realized the hydrogen wasn't even necessary. And that opened the door to understanding that you could have a nuclear reactor at the center of the Earth and at the center of other planets. So this was, I was getting farther and farther away. And the curious part is that the science establishment still to this very day worries about the inner core being iron metal and trying to figure out why it doesn't fit the way it should. They totally ignore the nickel silicide. So it's like they've been taking money from taxpayers for 40 years to try to solve the same problems that they were solving then that they couldn't solve, and ignoring the solutions that lead to further advances down the way.
So I've been writing questions down because your story is fascinating. I love it. But going back to the density of the core. So we know that when earthquakes happen, they ring the earth like a bell. And they bounce off, as per that lady's research, they bounce off the core of the earth. Now, I was 10 years United States Navy. I worked on radar and weapon control systems. We had a thing called radar, and we know that when radar electromagnetic energy goes out, it gets absorbed by certain objects and then comes back. And this distance, we can tell distance by the amount that's absorbed and the amount that reflects back. Now, how come we're not able to tell the density of the core by when that earthquake bounces off the core and that wave comes back and we measure the approximate loss of that wave? We could basically detect how much energy was transferred in the heat, how much was lost in the transference, and if we knew that, then we know how much was absorbed by the density of the core, and therefore we'd have an approximate density of different elements that would actually bring about what that would be.
Well, you just don't have the precision with the earthquake waves. That's the problem. Now, you do. This was the inner core was discovered. I mean, like I say, in 1936, it was envisioned, but it wasn't proven until a big earthquake in 1960. And the earth literally rang like a bell for 2 weeks. You have this inner core vibrating in this liquid, and it modulated all the waves that were bouncing around. So you don't have the precision to do all of these things, and you don't have the precision to actually resolve an object that's like 10 miles in diameter at the very center of the Earth, the Geo-reactor. But there are other ways to get at this information. Now, one thing that's of interest here is the Earth's magnetic field. There again, the geoscience community has been operating since 1939 on the same idea. 1939, Walter L. Sasser conceived of the idea that the Earth's magnetic field was generated by a dynamo action. Now, you know probably from your naval experience that a magnetic field is produced by a moving charge.
Correct.
So to have a dynamo, you need something where the charge can move. Well, of course, L. Sasser only knew that the Earth's core was fluid. So he envisioned convection in the fluid core, moving the fluid around, twisted by the rotation of the planet to generate a dynamo, if you would, a magnetic amplifier. Now, this people have made models, computational models, use supercomputers to model this convection in the Earth's core without ever reasoning through it. Right. Think about it. You put a pot of water on the stovetop, and before it starts to boil, you add a few tea leaves or celery seeds, and you see a bottom to top, top to bottom motion. That's convection. Okay, this is what people were believing is taking place in the fluid core. Well, if they had reasoned a little further, they might have realized that there are two reasons that sustained convection in the fluid core is physically impossible. Okay, and then it's easy to understand. Yeah. You've got the weight above, so that the bottom of the fluid core is 23% more dense than the top. So a little bit of heating at the bottom makes it a little bit less dense, maybe by a factor of maybe 1% at most. But that's not enough to make the core top heavy, so that the top is heavier than the bottom and it does the convection. Right. Now, there's still another reason. Convection involves heating from beneath, right? Right. So if assume that convection could take place, you have to remove the heat from the top almost as soon as it gets there, or your convection will cease. Now, in a pot of water on the stove top, the heat leaves the top of the pot, the water vapor, the steam. But in the core core is surrounded by the mantle, which is like a blanket of rock that has less heat capacity, less thermal conductivity, less viscosity. So you can't remove the heat efficiently. So in other words, the whole story that people in the geoscience community are putting out about the Earth's magnetic field being produced in the fluid core, it's nonsense. Well,
there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't make sense as well. You have this dynamo theory. Now, obviously, you're saying you have to have a charge. You have to have an electric field in order to have a magnetic field. Now, Earth's magnetic field, and we were just talking about this earlier, I said I've noticed this for the past 10 years to 12 years, is there is something odd about the Earth's magnetic field that you could predict magnetic fluctuations and coronal mass ejections with transitions within certain Earth patterns, and these would be earthquakes. And you said yes, because of nuclear fission.
So let me get to that point.
Go ahead.
Let me get to that point. So the reality, I first imagined the georeactor, the nuclear reactor at the center of the Earth, as the energy source for powering the geomagnetic field that people thought. Then I realized that it's physically impossible. And I looked a little deeper and realized that convection is physically possible in the georeactor, because you have this mass of fission products and radioactive material that can circulate, and a little bit of a uranium will precipitate out and fission, and so it strikes a balance. It keeps a balanced operation. And if too much comes out, it disrupts the convection, and so pretty soon you've got sort of a metastable state, a self-sustaining, regulating activity. Yeah. Now, when this produces the magnetic field, it's all around the Earth. Now, when charged particles from the sun interact with that magnetic field, if it's a constant flow of charged particles, nothing happens. The field just deflects them in the usual way. But if the flux changes, then you get induction, and energy is passed through the magnetic field into the georeactor, which can then destabilize and do all sorts of things. Think about this. Did you ever play with a transformer when you were a kid? Well, if you take a transformer and you put a little meter on one side of it, and you connect a battery to the other side, the moment you connect it, you see one little jerk in one direction of that needle. And the moment you release the connection, you see a jerk in the other direction, because a direct current can't flow through the magnetic field, but a variable current can. Mm-hmm. And so this is why when you see a big burst from the sun, it can interact with the Earth's magnetic field, induce currents into the georeactor, which can then cause a change in the dynamics at the surface of the Earth. And the problem, here's the problem. I mean, there's some real serious problems that can happen when the Earth's magnetic field gets screwed up.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole geoscience community, the Air Force that should be concerned with it, they have their heads in the sand. And yet what we're looking at is something that can change on a very quick time scale. Because the georeactor is only 1/10,000,000th the mass of the fluid core. So it doesn't take much to upset the georeactor. Whereas the Earth's core, if that's where the field were generated, which is not, it wouldn't change much at all.
So this is a fission reaction that's going on in the Earth's core, but it's surrounded by this outer core. Now, what about the pressure that's induced onto the core by this outer core? Wouldn't that have some type of effect on the metals within that core that are interacting within that fusion reaction or that fission reaction?
They would just be more compressed. They would be more compressed. They'd be more dense. I think I once calculated that the density would be something like 36 times the density of water.
Okay.
Instead of maybe 40 times. So, I mean, they would just be more compressed. There's still another story, though, that connects to what happens at the surface of the Earth. We go back to the instatite chondrites. Mm-hmm. Even before I realized the inner core, the instatite chondrites are a rare group of meteorites that formed under oxygen-starving conditions. Now, no one in the geoscience community could understand how that happened, because they thought quite correctly that the matter of the primitive meteorites is very similar to the outer part of the sun, except for the volatiles. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't understand, how did you get these oxygen-starved minerals? Well, that's one of I think that was the first paper I published with Hans Suess, because I realized that what determines how oxidizing is in this primordial matter is the reaction between hydrogen and oxygen. H2 plus a half O2 equals H2O. And that's pressure independent, whereas the condensation is pressure dependent. So the higher pressure, things condense at higher temperatures, and they condense in regions where the oxygen is starved. Okay? Now there's an interesting story parallel to this. In 1944, I'm sure he was a good German. He was head of, I think, the Göttingen Institute, and had the look of a good German. He published a paper in 1944 where he used thermodynamic considerations to calculate what would form from the Earth condensing at high pressures. Well, we proved those calculations were correct. At the highest temperatures, at those pressures, liquid iron condenses as a liquid before the silicates, before what would be the mantle. So what you'd have is the core raining out, and then the silicates would form around there. And if it was really cold, then you would have the ices and the gases, and you'd have a planet almost the same size and mass as Jupiter.
Huh, that's interesting.
Now, do you see where this is going?
I do.
Imagine 300 Earth masses of gases and ices pressing down on this solid rock we call Earth. It would be about 2/3 the present diameter. Now, when the sun ignited, there's a point where it's called a T-Tauri phase, where masses of ejection, real violent activity, strip the gases away and strip the ices away. So at one point, there was a solid Earth, 2/3 the diameter, maybe 70%, covered entirely with a continental crust. No ocean basins, but compressed. And within that compression was all the energy of compression. But the heat of compression was lost. So the Earth could not decompress without either cooling down, which would impede the decompression, or the lost heat of compression being supplied by another source, the georeactor. So as the energy supplied the lost heat of compression, the Earth began to decompress. And it must have been a hellish time, because it takes a lot more energy to crack a hard shell the crust than to propagate a crack. And but over time, what has happened is that the Earth's diameter has increased. Now there's two things that must occur as a consequence. The surface area must increase, and it does so by forming cracks. And they're cracks that have heat sources under them that can produce lava, and they're cracks that don't. And the lava that's produced in volcanoes just flows until it finds a crack to fall into, and it makes more surface. Now, that's not the only story. The other thing is the curvature of the Earth has to change. Think about this. Slice an orange. Take the pulp out. You've got an orange. Now set it on a cantaloupe or a melon. It doesn't lay flat, but it must lay flat because you've got all this gravity pushing down. So there's two ways that the curvature of a continental section could change. One is by making tears around the edges. Mm-hmm. Not a very energetically favorable way to do it. But that's how the fjords and the submarine canyons formed. The other way is that tucks form. All this excess surface material forms tucks, and they fall over and break. And that's how the mountains characterized by folding form. See, all of these things are just logical consequences.
So I hope you just shut up the flat earther that's in our chat right there. He's out here telling us the Earth is flat, and you basically just said that it's impossible from the continental formation of this planet that the Earth is actually flat. The fact that we have coastal territories and mountains, and they're formed in the specific way that they're formed, means that the Earth is specifically curved.
Well, it's easy to see that it's curved. Mm-hmm. If you stand on the beach and you watch a ship that's going away from you, what you see is the bottom of the ship disappears and the mast slowly disappears as it goes over the horizon. And when the ship's coming the opposite way, you first see the mast and then see as it comes. But we've done jillions of measurements of earthquake waves. Earthquake waves propagate through solid matter, or in the case of the fluid core, through liquid matter. At least one type does. And so this is all good evidence that the Earth is not flat.
Yeah. Well, and I was in the Navy, and one of the best experiences I've ever had, and I've seen this about 4 or 5 times, was watching the green flash at sunset. And this is a very, very rare phenomenon. And it happens because of the refractive index at the point of time that the Earth goes over the horizon, and the angle that the sun is sitting at with a certain amount of barometric pressure, refractive index, and the amount of moisture that's in the atmosphere refracts green. And that only happens if the sun is over the horizon.
Yeah, I've heard about this. I've never seen it myself.
Yep, seen it multiple times.
But oh, you're lucky. You see, these things are all making sense. Mm-hmm. Now, what making sense means that they're connected logically and causally. Okay, and what I found from the way that I make discoveries is that typically you make one discovery and it opens the door to the next discovery, which opens the door to the next one, because it's like a logical progression of understanding.
Yes.
Okay. So this has been my history, and I could even let me give you another example. That's
Sure.
a kind of a fun example. Scientists tend to be forward-looking and never look over, or rarely look over their shoulder at the validity of things that they thought were correct in the past. Important concept.
Very important, especially in science.
And so this is a beautiful example of this is as follows. After conceiving of the idea of a nuclear reactor at the center of the Earth, no, at the center of Jupiter. This was thinking Jupiter. This was a year before. I got to thinking about that. Jupiter is like a little tiny star that was too small to ever be a star. And so I got to thinking, well, it's got a nuclear reactor. Now, is it possible that stars are like those big things that go boom, that are ignited by nuclear fission? Okay. And I thought, no, this is too obvious. This is too obvious. So I went to the Science and Engineering Library at UCSD. This was before people had access to literature searches. And I started going back through the astrophysics literature. And I got to the point of earlier than 1938, before the discovery of nuclear fission, and I found nothing. So I dug deep and I hired a librarian to do computer lit searches on all the databases he had access to. He found nothing. So I wrote a paper, the thermonuclear ignition of stars by nuclear fission. Now, it turns out that the people that worked on the nuclear reactions that power stars were names that you would know: Edward Teller, von Weizsäcker. Hans Bethe got the Nobel Prize for this. And this was one of the most important challenges in the early 1900s, was what is the energy source that powers the sun and the other stars? And at first people thought, well, it was the dust and gas that collapsed gravitationally would make heat. But it didn't take long before people realized that that heat would not last for as long as life has existed on Earth. So there was something else. Well, I think it was 1924, maybe 1923. Oliphant and Hartek and Rutherford, I think they were the ones, discovered nuclear fusion reactions. That's when two light nuclei come together and join and produce a lot of heat. Well, this was what the beginning of the basis that the reactions, the thermonuclear reactions in stars were based on, the fusion reactions. Now, they're called thermonuclear because you have to have temperatures on the order of 1,000,000 degrees for these two positive nuclei to come together. They got to be moving awful fast. And so when people like Hans Bethe and von Weizsäcker and Edward Teller envisioned this formation, they just assumed that when the dust and gas collapsed to form the star, that it would get the 1,000,000 degrees to ignite these reactions. At the time, no one knew any different.
Right.
But then in the last month of 1938, nuclear fission was discovered. And you know that there was very much of an interest on how to make things that go boom from that. And then using that to make even bigger things go boom. In fact, Edward Teller is referred to as the father of those big things. Okay? So, but they never looked backward. They never looked over their shoulder and thought, hey, maybe you had nuclear fission that ignited the stars. Nobody else did. And the astrophysicists would make models, and they try to tweak their models, and they'd assume some sudden flare up or make it the dense medium or whatever. Well, I saw a different possibility, and it's an experimentally determined possibility because the evidence is every time one of those big things goes boom, it's because one of those fission devices got the temperatures up to make it happen.
Right.
So I wrote this up and I submitted it to a couple of journals that rejected it. One of them, the rejection was based on a reviewer's comment that I was throwing away 40 years of astrophysics. Fortunately, that was accepted for publication in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of London. And I realized something else. See, the astrophysicists had always thought that when the dust and gas collapses, the stars light, that means that all of the stars, except little tiny brown dwarfs, are ignited. And I said, no. They're only ignited if there were fissionable elements that could ignite them. A dark star consisting only of hydrogen and helium with no heavy metals. The mass of the sun would only be about the size of the Earth because it wouldn't be expanded out by the heat.
So this basically takes away modern cosmological theory. It throws it out of the way because that theory is saying that hydrogen and helium compress and this comes and forms a supernova, produces heavier elements in its core, and those heavier elements come together.
It goes beyond that. The astrophysics community, one of the hot subjects for the past 30 years or so, 20 years, has been the dark matter. Mm-hmm. Well, this was also in the paper. There was a astrophysicist that I knew, an astronomer actually, who had been measuring the rotation. You know, a lot of galaxies look like a starfish.
Right.
Okay, the spiral galaxies. Well, it turns out the dynamics of those is that if there wasn't something keeping them in that configuration, they'd wrap around themselves. And so people have come to understand that there's a massive halo, maybe 10 or more times the mass of the stars, of something invisible that they can't see, that keeps that spherical, that assemblage.
Right.
And so I realized that was easy. That was dark stars that had never been ignited. It made sense. Now, go back a little bit further. The Hubble Space Telescope made a lot of important observations. And one of the things that has been observed is that galaxies sometimes shoot jets out from their center.
Right.
I have in one of my papers pictures of like 3 jets. One jet is 4,000 light years long, another one 10,000 light years long, another 368,000 light years long. And they can either be in one direction or both the opposite directions.
Right.
So I published the idea that these jets are what ignites imagine a galaxy of just dark stars.
Okay.
All right. Now, as they gradually coalesce at the center, you get some really massive object, and you get hellish pressures and temperatures, and nobody knows exactly what happens, but at some point it shoots out a jet, its first jet. And that jet then has the heavy elements. In fact, it has all the elements, but it has the heavy elements that any dark star that it encounters, it seeds with heavy elements and ignites. So what you're looking at with the galaxy are the paths of those jets that lighted the dark stars. And the rest of the galaxy is surrounded by dark stars. That's what keeps its stability.
Now, many of these jets, haven't they been discovered to be Birkeland currents? These would be heavy electrified plasma channels.
I don't think people know what's in those jets.
I
mean,
love
people may make models, but they don't really know. And but this does make sense, and it's also the source of the cosmic rays that have all the heavy particles and stuff. But this the astrophysicists ignore this, and they still make up all sorts of stories about what makes dark matter. Is it one thing or another? And yet they totally ignore what I've published in one of the most prestigious journals.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that modern science has got some severe problems. I was talking to a scientist from NYU on this show about it, and he vehemently disagreed with me. But I mean, that's what we have modern day academia basically becoming a racket for financial funding for these large institutions and for these pet projects that really have no recourse. Like you went out there and you got federal funding through NASA at one of your projects, and you came out there and you proposed a solution within the first year, and you lose your freaking funding because you solved the damn problem. And see, that's not what they want.
Well, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
This was only about 3 months ago. At the time, it could be 4 months ago, whatever. There was a paper published that had a number of authors, one of whom I knew from past experience, who is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, who used to be at the Carnegie Geophysical Lab, may still be. But I once talked to him about making measurements of nickel silicide at high pressures. Well, he wouldn't do it. And but this paper was about a new idea for light elements being included in the iron alloy inner core. And it talked about all the other problems of the iron alloy inner core. Well, I wrote a nice little perspective entitled, "What's Wrong with This Picture?" Because the importance of the story is that this is the way you make scientific discoveries. You ask yourself the question, what's wrong with this picture? I mean, that's a catchphrase from the 1980s. You remember it in the movie Terminator. Yeah, when he lands on Earth, the guy says, "What's wrong with this picture?" But that's one way to make discoveries, to ask what is wrong. And these people don't. So I wrote something up really well done, nice, submitted it to Nature, which is the most widely read. And it was rejected without review in less than 24 hours. So, I published it somewhere else that's not as, but say the science has become badly corrupted. But now what we're learning from topics that I don't want to mention at this point is the medical establishment is also badly corrupted.
It is.
And the public health people are also badly corrupted.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of my research into the occult, the esoteric, I can take this back to 1700, where we start seeing an infiltration into the contemporary esoteric communities, and this is infringes on academia and the secret societies that came out there and infiltrated the modern day Masons and infiltrated the modern day fraternities and these other fraternities within the universities, and therefore got implemented into various academic positions and controlled academia from there. We start seeing this at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, the introduction of the Malthusian principles of eugenics, how the eugenics revolution starts coming to America, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it's about this time when physics makes its largest and most giant stride. This is, about 30 years after J.J. Thomson discovers the electron, we have the discovery of quantum physics, Niels Bohr, all these guys, and they come about and start revolutionizing science. At the same time, people like Nikola Tesla are being censored massively and heavily because they had an idea of where they were going to take science and utilize it in the sense of a material course of a very, very objective viewpoint of science, that science is simply this, we control it, and that, that the atom is 99.99% space, and we're going to focus on that 1.0001% matter because that's everything, and everything exists within that 0.1%, and that's all that you can know and understand. And modern physical theory has came out of exactly these ideas and principles, which are fundamentally flawed from the get-go. And Einstein knew this. He talked about this in the 30s. He talked about this in the 40s. Tesla obviously knew this. I mean, Tesla was shooting ELF waves down to the Earth's core in 1905, 1910. I mean, we should be looking at that and saying, hey, what did this guy know?
Well, this is one of the things that is so bad about science. In the first half of the 20th century, when these discoveries you were talking about, quantum mechanics, yep. That's the scientific basis of much of modern technology is based upon that. And what was happening at that time is there was very little support from the government for scientific research. I mean, Niels Bohr was funded primarily by Carlsberg Brewery. And so the scientists went into science because, number one, they loved it, and number two, they had to be very, very good to succeed.
Right.
And because it was just the way it was. And to a large extent, they were trying to understand, and so they would get things wrong, they discuss them, they debate them, and out of that came the discoveries that are the basis for modern technology. Well, we don't have that now. Yeah. The science community is the people are becoming scientists that should be managing hotels or restaurants or whatever, because it's, if it's in a way, it's sort of like music. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people enjoy music. A fair number of those have a good singing voice. A few of those could actually perform music. A smaller amount of those could compose music. You see, so you can't just say to everybody, well, anybody that wants to can compose music and you'll be paid well for it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know the cacophony. I mean, it would be terrible. So, but this is what's the case with scientists. Now, as far as the establishment is concerned, I have been a member of the American Geophysical Union since 1972 or 73. Okay. I've never received any kind of commendation from that organization, never been given any sort of award or kudos or anything. I mean, I have the same status as somebody that just joined, basically.
Wow.
So you see that the things are not the way they should be. Meanwhile, they get hyped on a political agenda, and one political agenda is the global warming. Oh, now this goes back. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was established in, I think, 1988.
Kyoto.
And they Their big job is to assess data to predict how much global warming we will have. And it's all a political consensus, so to speak. And they have hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists involved in this. Now, what is the one thing that they have never mentioned in all of their 30 years of promoting stuff? They've never mentioned the deliberate spraying of particulate matter in the troposphere.
So you're talking like chemtrails?
I'm talking about chemtrails because they're ostensibly concerned with human influence on climate change. And yet no one in that whole group will mention chemtrails. Now, the one thing, they promote the idea that that's carbon dioxide that's trapping heat that's from Earth's fossil fuel burning, that's trapping Earth's heat so it doesn't radiate into space. Well, in the January, I forget the date, 17th maybe, 2017 issue of the New York Times, there was a picture on the front page. It was a plot of temperature over time that people have done. And a nuclear physicist at Harvard by the name of Goschalk noticed a bump right at where World War II was. So he downloaded the databases from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, 8 databases, and he used sophisticated curve fitting techniques and discovered, yes, this was a real bump during World War II, and he concluded that it was due to human activity. He submitted it to a climate journal, I think one of Nature's journals. It was rejected, but he had posted it on a preprint server. And when I saw that, I knew that this was something important. Here's the reason. If it were CO2 that were being produced during World War II, that caused the heating, it wouldn't have dropped off promptly because the CO2 will stay in the atmosphere for decades.
There's got to be some type of aggregation, some type of mitigation of that CO2 over a period of time. So you should see some type of steady decline of that away from that point in time. If it was created and then a steady...
Over decades.
But instead it was instantaneously, wasn't it?
Well, just a few years. A little peak. Now, what that said to me was that it's particulate pollution. Because in World War II, factories were running full bore every day of the week, smoke going out of their smokestacks, all sorts of vehicle traffic, all sorts of explosions, cities being demolished, material going up in the air. Now, when things get thrown in the air, particles like chemtrails, for example, if they don't keep spraying, in a matter of a few days to a few weeks, they fall out of the air. Okay? And so this is what I said. And then in the 50s, when the reconstruction was starting, first in Germany and then in Southeast Asia, then you start getting a climbing again. And this is the industrial pollution. And so this made sense. And even check the ice core data for the wartime years, there was no increase in carbon dioxide. So this says that particulate pollution is causing global warming. Now, the way this works is the following. Particles that are put in where clouds form, whether they're solid or liquid particles, they absorb heat from the sun, they absorb radiation from the earth, they become heated, they transfer that heat to the gas by molecular collisions. Well, that changes the difference in temperature between up there and down here. And that reduction in that difference in temperature reduces the efficiency of convection.
Yep.
Now, I did a elegant and simple experiment a while back. It was about the Earth's fluid core, where I had a beaker of water on a regulated hot plate with some celery seeds in it so you could see the convection. And then I put a ceramic tile on top of the beaker, a beaked beaker, so it wouldn't seal it. And that reduced the heat that was being lost from the surface, reduced the difference in temperature between the bottom and the top, and the convection slowed markedly in a minute. Okay? This is the cause of global warming. And all these chemtrails what they're doing is causing global warming.
You're exasperating.
I submit to you that this is there are a lot of reasons they're doing it, but I believe that this is the overall reason. Number one, you're causing global warming, you're disrupting the planet, the agriculture, the health of animals, plus what they're spraying is coal fly ash, the toxic waste of coal burning. I've written a number of papers with my physician friend, Mark Whiteside, that there's good evidence that this is what they're spraying. They decided that the material coming out of smokestacks of coal burning utilities was too toxic to be allowed to go out, so they trap it. But then surreptitiously, they're supplying it to the chemtrail producers to spray in the air. And there's a reason for understanding this. Going back to the 1990s, ordinary people, citizen scientists, if you would, took rainwater samples after spraying and had them analyzed at a commercial lab. And what they found was that, among other things, they had aluminum in there. Now, the difference, aluminum is toxic. When it's in a chemically mobile form, it's toxic to about all life on Earth, because generally aluminum is locked up tight with oxides. So if you were spraying sand up there, it wouldn't be extracting aluminum into the rainwater.
Right.
But with coal fly ash that formed above the burner in a coal burning factory, the chemistry is all different. And one very good laboratory result from Spain showed that 38 elements at least were extracted partially in just 24 hours into distilled water from coal fly ash. So we're getting all sorts of toxins: arsenic, mercury, cadmium, chromium, just thallium, just a whole bundle of toxins, including radioactive elements, because these things were concentrated in the coal and then concentrated in the coal fly ash. And so we're breathing these in, and the fine particles can go through the eyes, through the nose. They can get into the brain. They can get into almost all the organs in the body. And you probably know from cigarette smoking, people might have smoked for 30 years and then get cancer way down the road. And so I think there's going to be a lot of people that'll be getting cancer and all sorts of, and you wonder whether the big burst of autism that happens in the school kids is not caused by the coal fly ash that they're poisoning the air with.
Now, so money and power is always at the root of the majority of evil. But if we look at other global level events that are happening right now, the debasing of the United States dollar, the hyperinflation that's occurring, the radical expenditure of the global economy heading towards massive collapse. We have the world on the brink of World War III, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, China, Taiwan, the United States in basically a declining mode from a world superpower. We have, I don't even want to get into the leadership because that brings in politics, but the leadership is completely incompetent, and they're actually acting like radical Marxists for some reason. It's almost like the whole world is being designed and manipulated to move towards this point of where it's going to all collapse, and it has to be, in a sense, reset. But it seems more nefarious. It doesn't seem like for money and power. Well,
the thing is that there are people. Well, I have to take a certain amount of blame, my generation. You see, Vietnam. Now, I was in the Navy, but when I was in the Navy, if you were in the Army and you had a specialty, you could volunteer to go as an advisor to Vietnam. So I got out before Vietnam became a problem. But there were a lot of people young people, who thought this war we had no business being in. And so you know about all the protests and the things. Well, the older generation would believe and do whatever the government said. Mm-hmm. And the younger generation said, no, we want none of this. But what they did is they threw away, not only did they do something good about Vietnam, but they threw away a lot of good religious values, family values, cultural values, the things that is the cohesive parts that have made a civilization. And when you throw that away, then you can do whatever you want. You've got no moral compass. Mm. And so what has happened was a generation of people that are truly evil. Yeah. They want to control and do things to humanity that the word diabolical would apply, evil would apply. And I think that these people want to control the world and to enslave and dehumanize people. Now, you can't take over a country that's prosperous, where people are making a living and feeling good about things. You have to cause it to collapse. And I think that in the last 2 years, we've seen shutting down pipelines so gas prices go up, opening gates to all sorts of people that may be bringing in disease and things like that. And I think that the chemtrails, they may serve a lot of purposes, but I think this is one of the biggest ones, to make people sick, to make farmland unproductive, to upset the climate. And we're seeing massive amounts of birds and insects. I mean, if you used to drive, I don't know whether you're old enough to do this, but when I used to drive through the country, boy, I tell you, every hour my windshield would be covered with insects. No more. Yeah. No more. Bird populations are down. Bats. This is all in this book that I just published. Yeah. And exactly how the chemtrails do this. And so what I really have come to understand is the overall, and in fact, I even found out what the pseudo-legal basis is, a Trojan horse international treaty. But this is another topic for another time, maybe. But the whole chemtrail operation, I believe, is part and parcel of destroying life as we know it on this planet, so that humans can be subjugated by what is an evil force.
It's almost as if, and I know this is a stretch, and I think there's enough speculation out there to confirm this, that they're not human. That whatever this is, it has an intelligence over us, a knowledge base over us, and it has put humanity in a sustained state of ignorance. This is why they control academia. This is why they control politics. This is why they control culture, society, the medical community, because they continuously put us into this loop of ignorance, to where most people aren't going to wake up, because it's Pavlov's dog all over again. Once he gets in that corner, they give him a treat, they let him out, they pet him, they tell him they love them, and then they put some type of other stressor back into their life to make them into that state of fear and suppress their knowledge and put them in that state of ignorance. And I mean, it's almost as if the planet's being terraformed.
Well, it is, but it's not being terraformed in a good way.
Yeah.
It's being, life is being destroyed. Now, the reality, and this is what these monsters don't really understand, is that human life doesn't exist all by itself. As a planet, we are connected with just about every living creature. Think about the bugs in your gut. I mean, you know, we're part of a giant community, and you start destroying that community, and we are headed toward the largest human caused mass extinction in all of history. So this has to cease and desist.
Absolutely, I agree. And you know, so I've speculated on this for a long time, just because my research has taken me through various levels of conspiracy. But then you get into kind of the occult knowledge and kind of the derivation of evil, the origins of evil, and how this is all manifested in the world, and kind of then the sick and sadistic aspects of who these people are and the crimes they perpetuated. I mean, everything from Jeffrey Epstein, and you can start seeing world leaders, royal bloodlines, and all these people affiliated into these types of crimes, and you start understanding that there's a deeper theological or motivation towards this. There's a different dogma that organizes these people, and you start tracing these origins to this level of theology that they study, this religion, if you want to call it, the Luciferian doctrine, the satanic doctrine, whatever you want to call it. And you start seeing that it's not necessarily derived from anything that I would call normal or human. And it really comes from these ancient alien theories. It comes from these ancient cultures that seemingly had some type of knowledge beyond what we have today.
Well, the knowledge I would submit is not a positive knowledge that comes, but yeah, this is what I've been seeing, and I think the religious communities have really failed in their responsibilities. If you look at the great religions, it's not just what they believe in, but they all have at their core rules for behavior within families, within communities. The Christians, for example, have the Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. And it's a way that people can live harmoniously with other people. And this is what is missing. And I think that there needs to be, and I'm not promoting, religion per se, but I think that one thing that would help us greatly is if there is a renaissance in religious activities.
Yeah,
because we're in a serious state now. The U.S. Senate just passed a bill that would give lend-lease to Ukraine. In other words, they could give them all sorts of military equipment without any accountability.
Mm-hmm. That's dangerous.
It is dangerous. Now, Vladimir Putin is very restrained. But if it became a war, he has a weapon that that many people don't know about. It's a missile that's fired under the water, and it creates a tidal wave. Now, you may remember about, so was it 2 months ago? I lose track of the exact times. We were getting warnings in San Diego of a tidal wave coming from the South Pacific. Well, the word I had is that region of the South Pacific was where they tested missiles, where they tested nuclear devices. And there was reason to believe that the Russians detonated a small one there that caused tidal waves all the way up to Alaska. Not great ones, but that wasn't a giant explosion either. And the Russians have in their policy that they won't use a nuclear weapon unless they've demonstrated it. Well, they demonstrated it.
Yeah.
So if these people are stupid. I mean, they're beyond stupid. I mean, I can understand that they think they can form in a war and.
Well, it's a proxy war right now. The United States and NATO are utilizing Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia because they don't want a nation-state-derived New World Order. They want an oligarchical or a techno-fascist or a multinationalist level New World Order that has no elected body, and sovereign nations are a thing of the past. And Russia and China are fighting for their seat at the table, and the globalists don't really want this. So this is why you have this proxy war coming out of Ukraine, where NATO is basically fighting proxy against Russia to suppress Russia's surge forward. And I agree with you on the weapons. And if you actually look at it, so obviously you were Navy, I was Navy too. 2018, I started noticing some interesting things happening. One of my former shipmates was the captain of one of the destroyers that crashed into another ship, and so they explained this as their Linksys system just kind of went offline, and all of a sudden they floated into another ship. And if you know, there's on naval ships and on naval aircraft, on F-18s, on the Air Force, they all utilize this Linksys system that basically utilizes satellite communication to link them all together, and all navigational track data comes down through these things. And I worked on these systems, so immediately when I started seeing this, I said, "Oh, their Linksys is getting hacked. They're being hacked by China. This is 100% legitimate, right?" And so all of a sudden, another ship runs aground. Another ship runs aground. And then in 2018, 10 years in the United States Navy, I can count the amount of ships that ran aground, ships that ran into other ships, and aircraft that fell out of the sky on one hand, right? In 2018, you had about 10 different aircraft in the United States Navy and the United States Air Force crash on test pilot missions. This year, you've had like 6 or 7 aircraft in the United States military crash. This is not normal. You had the USS Connecticut in the South China Sea, right? Supposedly a nuclear powered submarine, top level class, runs into an underground mountain. No, it didn't. Our nuclear submarines don't run into underground mountains unless they're completely disabled electronically and allowed to float and hit something, which is most likely what happened because that's the weapon that China has. China has a new weapon that they can basically, remember that plane that just crashed in China a few weeks ago? Took a nosedive?
Yeah.
That's the weapon they have. They can take things out of the sky just like that, shut them down. It's an electromagnetic pulse weapon, or it's a directed energy weapon.
Another story. You remember, was it a year ago? I forget the time. That a ship in the Suez Canal.
Yep, the Evergrande.
You remember that was blocked and it ran aground and
the Evergiven.
And well, apparently there was some tracking, and they had made the ship make some kind of a hand gesture before running it to the ground. And then allegedly they were removing all sorts of contraband from the ship.
Did you hear about the supposed weapon that was on that ship?
No.
So this is interesting. So a Turkish news broadcast. This is like live in Turkey on their news broadcast. They bring in the special investigator, and he's talking about the evergreen ship known as the Ever Given, which is stuck in the Suez Canal, and that 6 intelligence agencies ran an operation in the Suez Canal along with Turkey intelligence agencies to basically get on board this ship and take out a weapon that had been developed over the last 20 years. And the weapon was basically this this chemical bomb that you put next to 5G antennas. And when the 5G antennas go on, over time, it starts releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the environment. It starts releasing a chemical that increases carbon dioxide uptake into the atmosphere. And that this ship was carrying all of these that were going to be set out throughout Europe and the Middle East. And that they had taken them out and dismantled them from that ship.
Well, I heard also that they were human cargo.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this all of this, if you want to call it a reset or a new something or other, it's evil at the roots in any dimension you want to look at. Now, what's ironic about all of this going on with Russia is that all of the NATO nations and the U.S. Want to support the efforts against Russia, so they put sanctions on Russia. Well, it turns out that every sanction they apply against Russia, it ends up costing them money in terms of their cost of fuel or of their ability to get fertilizer. Mm-hmm. And so it harms the U.S., it harms Europe, and Russia, meanwhile, is getting rich over it.
That's right. So all the sanctions that Joe Biden and the United States are putting on the Russia are hurting the Western nations and the United States, including the global economy, and it's doing nothing to Russia. It's actually making them richer, and they're actually developing what the World Economic called the New Silk Road, which is new trade agreements on a new financial system that was developed by China with a digital yuan and a gold-backed ruble that's integrated through the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Asia-Indo-Pacific.
And the U.S. dollar is going to no longer have value as a world currency.
Yep.
And so it's hard to believe that these people have maybe not a whole lot between their ears.
Well, I think that they're. I think that most of them are doing it for money and power. That they don't care about the consequences. That they have to move forward right now because the stakes are too high. I think that a lot of them are being manipulated, coerced, and blackmailed into this. You talked about the human cargo. We know how Jeffrey Epstein used that human cargo as a Mossad agent with Ghislaine Maxwell. Her father was Mossad. He was killed by the Russian oligarchs. But what they did is they would get a politician into a hotel room with one of those little human cargoes, and they would put a gun in their hand. They would tell them to do some bad things to it and then kill it, and they would film the whole thing, and that's what they would use against them.
You know, I came to understand this a long time ago before this got popular in the press, because it used to be the Soviets used the honey trap, mm-hmm. which was, you know, a beautiful young woman to entice a married man or something and then have something over him. Well, with modern morals being what they are, it just didn't have the power anymore.
Yep.
So that's why the little ones come in, because they're illegal.
Yep.
And so that's the...
And they're extinguishable when they're coming from third world countries like Ukraine, Mexico, and... Now, what are your thoughts? Because I think that I always look that there has to be something more darker and sinister here, because humanity itself, I don't think is evil. I don't think we derive from evil. I think that we're traditionally good, especially in a communal format. What are your thoughts on aliens, alien visitations, ancient aliens, or just kind of like the current structure? Because we have a lot of stuff coming out about UFOs. We just had that report that was released by the DOD about the former 8-Tip project, where they said that they investigated reports of people having radiation burns from UFO encounters, including women having unexpected pregnancies after certain abductions. I mean, this is the Department of Defense saying this in their documents. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've always found the whole idea fascinating. I remember back in 1954, which you weren't even a twinkle in your mama's eye.
I wasn't.
I remember 1954, there was a lot, every Sunday, the newspaper would be about some people spotting a UFO or something. And I always thought this was fascinating, but I never would allow myself to go much farther than to say this is an interesting situation if it is true, because I think we would have to have some very compelling evidence. And so I've sort of kept that distance, so to speak. I mean, I enjoy even today a good movie with that sort of theme. But, you know, I almost think that with what's happening in certain levels of power structure, you could almost relate that to, you remember the movie, it was the Living Dead or The Walking Dead or something, where the aliens would put something in the back of their neck and turn them into robots. It almost seems you could almost imagine that this was happening in a Davos meeting or something. Now I'm being facetious, so don't quote me as saying.
Well, there's actually evidence to support what you're saying. I'm not lying. There's evidence to support it.
Well, one day maybe I will see such evidence. But anyway, this is it's really hard to believe that well, I think the main thing is that you have institutions like that 3-letter agency that's so powerful over here that have spent millions, if not billions of dollars to understand human psychology and to know how to deceive the masses, all of the masses or most of the people. And that's what's happened. This is why I've pointed to these streaks in the sky to people, and their response is conspiracy theory. You know, this is the same thing that is happening now with those, would you say, injectables?
Right. Fauci ouchies.
Yes. And that's the same deceit, mass deceit, that people are being blinded. In fact, this latest book that just published today that you mentioned, which is on my website, and if you click on it, you get a link to the Amazon.
Yep, we got the link going out right now, so the link is in the chat.
And if we actually bring this in, the chemtrails and this other substance being mass psychosis or hypnosis, depends on how you perceive it, but people being deceived on a massive scale about this.
Yep.
I mean, this is the stuff they're putting in the air for so long to so many people. I mean, this is poisoning humanity. It's killing the animals. It's killing God's creatures. It's killing life on this earth. And I mean, this makes what Hitler did seem like kindergarten play.
That's it. And you know, we had a show today where we talked a little bit about this. So one of the things about the Fauci ouchie, that goes in the arm, is that it produces what's known as antibody-dependent enhancements. And basically what these are big linemen on a football team that stop the variant that's supposed to be coming in, but they also block your natural immunity from other things. So they make you immunosuppressed and immunosusceptible. So they produce what is actually known, and this is why you have Dr. Zelenko, Dr. Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA vaccine, Dr. Gausha Vandenbosch, who is a virologist, all coming out and saying that this is going to produce what's known as VAIDS, viral AIDS, autoimmune deficiency syndrome, because these people now have massively deficient immune systems. And now, right now, we're starting to see it. So in Australia, there's a 1,700% increase in the amount of deaths from this latest strain of COVID that's hitting Australia. And this is up 1,700% since the beginning of the pandemic. So if you match the numbers from the beginning of the pandemic to now, the increase 1,700%. Here's the kicker. 4 out of the 5 deaths were from Fauci ouchie patients.
Well, the VARS, which is the military database.
Right.
For people between
CDC.
the ages of 18 and 40, I think. Deaths have been up 1,100%.
Right, I think that was Project Silas. So Project Silas was the DoD project that they were doing for a 10-year study on the health of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and guardians. Our good friend Todd Callender is one of the attorneys working on that. Thomas Rentz, Lee Dundas, they're the ones that testified with Ron Johnson in the Senate about this. And you're right. I think there's a 3,000 increase in the amount of deaths of them. There's a 387% increase in cancers.
And the information's coming from places that people hadn't thought about, like the life insurance companies that are showing all-cause mortality increasing dramatically.
Yep. And so there is some type of conspiracy that's happening here. And whether it's human or not human, that's hard to say. And I think that's speculative, but there's...
Well, you're splitting. You have to be careful of your words here, because I would be willing to submit that many of the people who are doing this, they may be biologically human, but they're not human in spirit or in nature.
Well said. Well said.
So it's a strange world, but it's one would hope that at some point in the not too distant future, all of a sudden things change radically in the right direction.
We're due for a golden age.
Yes, we are, and a gold-backed currency.
I agree with that one. I agree with that one as well. A gold-backed currency and a golden age of knowledge and information and technological development with innovative principles looking back to what we got wrong so we can look forward to what we can get right.
With truthfulness and freedom.
Absolutely. Dr. Herndon, this was awesome. I'm gonna have Andrea send you the information. We're gonna book you again because we have so much more to talk about. We have so many other things to talk about, and we're out of time. But we got to talk, so we have to have you back on so we can have those conversations. I appreciate your time tonight.
This has been fun because we resonate on a number of levels and a number of subjects here.
Agreed. And I'd actually next time I'd like to talk more about the cosmological picture, galactic formation, a lot of the cycles that we look at, we call the grand calendar precessional cycles that we look at from Earth, as well as your understandings of consciousness. So if that's possible for next time's conversation, I'm up for it.
Well, Louis, we'll give it a try.
Fantastic. Thank you much, sir, for joining us tonight. Everybody else, guys, we'll see some of you guys here in 30 minutes for Fringe After Dark. Other than that, you guys have a great night. Take care. Much love, respect. God bless. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Joshua.